Imagine financing your brother's entire wedding only to be barred from attending and told your generosity was unwanted, then quietly revealing you own every venue, caterer, and florist involved, and canceling the celebration with a single phone call. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports for Sterling Hospitality Group. My assistant buzzed through. "Mr. Sterling, you have a call from Elegant Events Wedding Planning." I almost declined. Then I remembered. My younger brother Marcus was getting married next month. I'd paid the deposit 6 months ago when I heard they were struggling with costs. $50,000 to ensure my brother had the wedding he dreamed of. The family never knew it came from me. David Sterling speaking. "Mr. Sterling, this is Amanda from Elegant Events. I'm calling about the Henderson Miller wedding next month." Her voice sounded strained. "I have some uncomfortable news about your invitation." I set down my pen. "Go ahead. Your family contacted us yesterday. They've asked us to remove you from the guest list entirely. They said there was a family disagreement, and they specifically requested that you not attend the ceremony, a reception." The words hit like a physical blow, but I kept my voice steady. "I see." However, Amanda continued quickly. "They also asked if they could keep the $50,000 deposit. You paid for the event." Mrs. Henderson said the family had already spent that money on other wedding expenses. For a moment, I said nothing. Through my office window, I could see the city skyline, half of which I owned through various investment companies. My family had no idea that their disappointing son, who they claimed never amounted to anything, controlled a hospitality empire worth $3.8 billion. "Mr. Sterling, are you there?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I'd like you to cancel the entire wedding." "I'm sorry, what? Cancel the Henderson Miller wedding? All of it? The venue, the catering, the flowers, everything?" Amanda's voice rose in panic. "Sir, I don't understand. You're not the groom. You can't just." "Amanda," I interrupted gently. "What's the name of your company?" "Elegant Events Wedding Planning." "And who owns Elegant Events?" I heard papers rustling. Sterling Event Holdings." "And who owns Sterling Event Holdings?" A longer pause. "Sterling Hospitality Group." "That's right. And I'm David Sterling, CEO and sole owner of Sterling Hospitality Group. So yes, I can cancel this wedding. In fact, let me be more specific. Cancel their reservation at the Grand Harbor Hotel as well. That's one of mine too. And Symphonic Catering also mine. The flower arrangements from Premier Botanical. My photography package from Lens and Light Studios. Mine as well." "Mr. Sterling, I had no idea you were." "There's more, Amanda. The bachelor party reservation at Harborview Resort, my rehearsal dinner at Coastal Elite Restaurant, mine. Even the limousine service they booked through Prestige Transportation, mine." I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "But sir, the wedding is in 3 weeks. There are 200 guests. Deposits paid. Cancel everything. Refund any deposits paid by guests for accommodations. Send the Hendersons and Millers a bill for the full amount they owe, minus my original $50,000 deposit, which I'm keeping as a cancellation fee." "Mr. Sterling, this will destroy the wedding. There's no way they can find alternative vendors this close to the date. That's not my problem anymore." After hanging up, I sat back in my chair. 28 years old, and my family still saw me as the college dropout who threw his life away when I left Harvard Business School to start my first company. They had no idea that the small event planning business I'd mentioned casually over the years had grown into one of the largest hospitality empires on the East Coast. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "David, we need to talk about your recent behavior. Your attitude toward Marcus and Jennifer has been unacceptable. We think it's best if you don't attend the wedding. We'll be keeping the money you contributed since we've already spent it." I smiled and typed back, "Understood. Enjoy the celebration." What my family didn't know was that I'd been quietly building my empire for 8 years. It started when I dropped out of Harvard, not because I was failing, but because I'd identified a gap in the luxury event market. While my family saw my decision as giving up, I was actually walking away from a guaranteed corporate job to bet everything on my vision. The first company, Sterling Events, began in my studio apartment. I planned corporate gatherings and small weddings, working 18-hour days and sleeping on my office couch. My family's response: "David's going through a phase. He'll be back to real work soon." Within 2 years, I'd bought my first property, a small event venue that was struggling financially. My family still thought I was playing entrepreneur, while they focused on Marcus, who was following the traditional path through law school. By year 4, I owned 6 venues across 3 states. Sterling Hospitality Group was born, and I started acquiring complementary businesses, catering companies, florists, photographers, transportation services, every aspect of the luxury event industry. My family remained oblivious. At holiday gatherings, they'd ask about my little business, while discussing Marcus's promising career at his law firm. The real growth came in years 6 and 7. I acquired struggling hospitality companies during the economic downturn, rebuilding them into profitable enterprises. Harborview Resort, Grand Harbor Hotel, the entire Coastal Elite restaurant chain, all companies my family had heard of, never realizing their disappointing son owned them. My phone started ringing 30 minutes after my conversation with Amanda. "David." It was my father's voice, tense and confused. "I just got a call from some woman saying our wedding venue was canceled. There must be some mistake." "No mistake, Dad." "What do you mean no mistake? This is ridiculous. We have a contract." A contract with Sterling Event Holdings, which is owned by Sterling Hospitality Group, which is owned by me. The line went quiet for several seconds. David, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you canceled my invitation to my own brother's wedding while asking to keep the $50,000 I paid for it. So I canceled everything else. You paid for the wedding, the venue, the catering, the hotel blocks, the flowers, the photography, the rehearsal dinner, the bachelor party. The transportation, all of it goes through companies I own. Congratulations, Dad, you just uninvited the person who was paying for your son's entire wedding. Another long silence. David, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. You made it clear I'm not welcome at family events. So my companies aren't welcome to provide services for family events either. Companies, David, you plan parties. I almost laughed. After 8 years, he still thought I'd planned birthday parties. Dad, I own Sterling Hospitality Group. We control 47 venues, 23 restaurants, 12 hotels, 6 catering companies, and 11 event service providers across 7 states. We generated $1.2 billion in revenue last year. That's impossible. Check our corporate website, check the business registry, check Forbes' list of fastest growing private companies. We were number 17 last year. I heard muffled conversation in the background. Mom had joined the call. David, Mom's voice came through, shaky and uncertain. We had no idea you were successful. You never told us. I tried to tell them. Every family gathering for 8 years. I tried to share what I was building. Remember when I mentioned buying the Harborview Resort? You said it was nice that I was staying busy. When I told you about expanding into hotels. You asked when I was going to get a real job even. Though I dropped out of Harvard to build this empire, I saw an opportunity and I took it. While Marcus was studying contract law, I was writing contracts that generated millions in revenue. My father cleared his throat. David, surely we can work something out. Marcus's wedding is no longer my concern. You uninvited me, remember? You made it clear that my presence would somehow diminish your perfect family celebration. My phone buzzed with another call. Amanda, no Dad, I need to take this. I switched to the other line. Amanda, Mr. Sterling. I've been getting calls all morning. Your brother, your parents, even the bride's family. They're all asking about rebooking, and sir, with 3 weeks notice, it's impossible. Every quality venue in the region is booked solid. The catering companies are committed to other events. There just aren't alternatives. What about the Grandview Manor? That's one of your properties too, sir, and it's already booked for that weekend, right? Well, then they'll need to figure something else out. Mr. Sterling, her mother called crying. She said there are 200 people invited, family flying in from across the country. She's begging for any solution. I considered this. Any solution? Yes, sir. All right. Here's what we'll do. It can have the wedding at the Grandview Manor, my smallest venue. Reception capacity for 80 people maximum. Basic catering package, house flowers, staff photographer only. Total cost, $200,000 paid in advance. Sir, that's 4 times what they were paying before and half the space. That's the offer. They wanted to exclude me from their celebration while keeping my money. Now they can include me in their decision-making while paying market rates. And if they refuse, then they can get married at City Hall. I hung up and returned to my work. 3 hours later, Marcus called directly. David, what the hell is going on? You're getting married. Congratulations. Don't play games with me. Mom's been crying all day. Dad's had 6 phone calls with different vendors, and everyone keeps telling him you own their companies. What kind of sick joke is this? It's not a joke. Marcus, it's business. Business. This is my wedding, your wedding that I was financing. Your wedding that I was uninvited from. Your wedding that the family decided I wasn't worthy to attend. You thought it would be better to exclude your brother from the most important day of your life, while secretly keeping the money he contributed. Does that sound like family behavior to you? Marcus was quiet for a moment. We didn't know the money came from you. Mom asked me for help 6 months ago. She said you were struggling with wedding costs, and Jennifer's family couldn't contribute much. I wrote a check for $50,000 that same day. Marcus, I didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked. Just like you never asked about my business, my life, or anything else. You just assumed I was the family screw-up and moved on. That's not true. Marcus, when was the last time you asked me a genuine question about my life? When was the last time any of you showed actual interest in what I do? The line was quiet. I'll make you a deal, I continued. You can have your wedding at one of my venues, but I want 3 things. A formal apology from the entire family. An acknowledgement that you misjudged me and my invitation restored, not as a courtesy, but because you actually want me there. David, of course, we want you there. Do you? Or do you want my money there? That's not fair. Fair. You uninvited your own brother from your wedding while keeping his financial contribution. Explain to me what's fair about that. Marcus sighed heavily. What happens if we don't agree to your terms? Then you figure out how to have a wedding with 3 weeks notice and no connections in the industry. Good luck with that. And if we do agree, then you get married at a beautiful venue with excellent service, and your brother stands beside you as family should. I need to talk to Jennifer and our parents. Of course you do. That evening my phone rang again. This time, it was Jennifer, Marcus's fiancée. David, it's Jennifer. I think we need to talk. Congratulations on your engagement. Thank you. Listen, I had no idea about any of this. Marcus never told me you were helping with costs, and I certainly didn't know about your businesses. Most people don't. I've been doing research all afternoon. Sterling Hospitality Group is huge. You own half the venues I dreamed of having my wedding at when I was growing up. It's been a good few years. David, I owe you an apology. We all do. I was there when your parents decided not to invite you. I should have spoken up. Why didn't you honestly? Because Marcus painted you as the irresponsible brother who never got his act together. I believed him. And now I realize that Marcus doesn't actually know you at all. None of them do. Jennifer paused, and I could hear emotion in her voice. David, I would be honored to have you at our wedding, not because of your businesses or your money, but because you're Marcus's brother, and you clearly care about family more than the rest of them realized. What does Marcus say? Marcus is processing. He's realizing that his big brother isn't who he thought he was. It's a lot to take in, and your parents, they're scared. They've spent years treating you like the family disappointment, and now they're learning you're probably the most successful person in the room at any gathering. Success isn't just about money. No, she agreed, but respect should be about recognizing when someone deserves it, and clearly you've deserved it for a long time. The next day, Amanda called with an update. Mr. Sterling, your family has accepted your terms. They've paid the deposit for the Grandview Manor package, and they formally requested that your invitation be restored. Did they agree to all the conditions? Yes, sir. Your father specifically asked me to tell you that the family would like to meet with you before the wedding to offer a formal apology, and your brother wants to know if you'd consider being his best man. I sat back in my chair, looking out at the city skyline again. 8 years of building an empire while my family saw only failure. 8 years of trying to share my success while they heard only excuses. 8 years of proving myself while they waited for me to grow up. Amanda, yes, sir. Tell them we'll have the meeting scheduled for this Saturday at Harborview Resort, my private dining room. And Amanda, yes. Make sure the catering is perfect. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Saturday. I arrived early and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. This resort had been my biggest acquisition of failing property that I'd transformed into the region's premier destination. The private dining room alone was worth more than most people's homes. My family arrived together: Mom, Dad, Marcus, and Jennifer. They looked around the room with obvious amazement: crystal chandeliers, hand-carved furniture, a view that stretched for miles across the water. David, Dad said, extending his hand formally. Thank you for meeting with us. Have a seat. They settled around the mahogany table as servers brought in lunch prepared by the same kitchen that catered to governors and celebrities. This place is incredible, Mom said quietly. I had no idea that I owned it. I mentioned buying a resort property 3 years ago. You said you were expanding your business. I was. This was the expansion. Dad cleared his throat. David, we owe you an apology. A major one. Go ahead. We misjudged you badly. For years, we saw what we expected to see instead of what was actually happening. Marcus leaned forward. David, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for dismissing your achievements, for assuming you were irresponsible, and for letting the family uninvite you for my wedding. Why did you assume I was irresponsible? Because you dropped out of Harvard. Because you never had a traditional job. Because you never bragged about your success. Would bragging have helped? No. But maybe if you'd been more direct about what you were building. I smiled slightly. Marcus, I told you 3 years ago that I'd acquired a hotel chain. You said, that's nice, and changed the subject to your latest case at the law firm. I didn't realize you meant you owned them. What did you think I meant? You had no answer. Jennifer spoke up. David, we'd like to start over. All of us, we want to know about your life, your business, your plans. We want to be real family. I nodded. And if I hadn't turned out to be wealthy, what then? Dad answered honestly. Then we probably would have continued misjudging you. That's what makes this so shameful. At least you're honest. Mom had tears in her eyes. David, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you've built. But more than that, I'm proud that you still wanted to help with the wedding even after how we treated you. You're my family. That matters to me even when it doesn't seem to matter to you. Marcus stood up and walked around the table. David, I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like to ask, again, would you be my best man? I looked at my younger brother, the golden child who'd followed every family expectation, who'd never taken a risk or built something from nothing. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. He was finally seeing me clearly. Marcus, I'd be honored. The wedding took place 3 weeks later at the Grandview Manor. Despite being my smallest venue, it was still spectacular, overlooking the coastline with gardens that had been featured in architectural magazines. The family that had once dismissed my party planning business watched in amazement as my staff executed a flawless celebration. During my best man speech, I looked out at the 200 guests, many of whom had heard whispered conversations about my business empire throughout the evening. When Marcus and I were kids, I began, he always looked up to me. Somewhere along the way, that changed. He started seeing me as the brother who took the wrong path, who gave up on conventional success. I paused, making eye contact with my family. What Marcus didn't realize is that I never gave up on success. I just defined it differently. Success isn't about meeting other people's expectations. It's about building something meaningful and sharing it with the people you love. I raised my glass to Marcus and Jennifer. May you build something beautiful together, and may you always remember that the best achievements are the ones you share with family. Later, as the evening wound down, Dad approached me on the terrace. David, I have a question. Sure. Why didn't you just tell us? Why? Let us think you were struggling all these years. I considered this carefully, Dad. I tried to tell you. But more than that, I wanted you to be proud of me for who I was, not what I owned. I wanted you to see that dropping out of Harvard was the right choice. That building something from scratch had value and we failed that test. You did, but you passed the test that mattered more. Which test was that? Tonight, when you had the chance to choose pride over family, you chose family. That's worth more than years of recognition. Dad put his hand on my shoulder. I'm proud of you, son, not just for your success, but for your character. You had every right to walk away from this family, and instead, you saved your brother's wedding. Family is family, Dad, I said, even when they don't act like it. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the 8 years I'd spent building my empire in plain sight of a family that couldn't see it. The Harvard dropout who became a billionaire. The party planner who created a hospitality dynasty. The family disappointment who turned out to be the family foundation. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Thank you for everything. I'm sorry it took me so long to see who you really are. I'm lucky to have you as a brother. I smiled and typed back. Welcome to the family business. Because that's what it had always been about. Not just building companies, but building something that could bring family together. It just took them a little longer to realize it. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The wedding had been featured on several social media accounts, and people were sharing photos of the venue, the food, and the celebration. But more importantly, I had messages from my parents, my brother, and Jennifer, all asking when we could have dinner. Again, real dinner this time, a family dinner. As I sat in my office Monday morning, looking out at the city skyline that I'd helped shape, I realized something important. Success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about being strong enough to keep loving them even when they are wrong. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, they figure it out on their own. They told me I was selfish, a mistake, a life-saving donor on standby, and hid the real reason I was never a match right under their noses. When I finally uncovered their lies, I didn't just walk away, armed myself with the truth, and shattered the family narrative they'd built on my silence. Hello, my name is Sydney, and I was never really part of the family that raised me. My mom once tore up my medical records in public, screaming that I was letting my sister die. My father stood beside her and called me a selfish mistake. They tried to force me to give up half my liver for a sister who used to laugh when I cried, told our school I was adopted before I even knew it was true. But the part that still wakes me at night. The doctor's 6 words, and the way my mother collapsed. When she finally couldn't lie anymore, what happens when your whole life was built on a lie and you were the insurance policy all along? I stayed in that chair, frozen, humiliated, and suddenly very sure that this wasn't just about a liver. The air around me had thinned, as if every breath was borrowed, not earned. Shreds of my medical file fluttered around my feet, landing like discarded receipts for a transaction I never agreed to. My mother stood over me, heaving with theatrical grief, demanding I do the right thing. As if that phrase still held meaning in our household. Do you think you get to sit there and act like some sort of victim? She snapped, her voice cutting through the hushed lobby like a dropped tray. Your sister is dying, Sydney, and you're doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. I glanced around. Strangers watching, a nurse pretending to tidy a file cart, a woman holding her toddler tighter, a receptionist tapping aimlessly at her keyboard. I saw it. Discomfort, pity, assumptions. No one came to my defense. That wasn't new. I bent to gather the papers that had landed by my shoes, not out of guilt, but because I needed them. Proof, record, something solid that couldn't be twisted like a bedtime story. My hand shook, only Mom took a step closer, almost whispering, as if the drop in decibel made her more sincere. I didn't raise you to be this cold, this ungrateful. We gave you everything. I looked up right into her eyes. She blinked, and that was it. The first moment of quiet, not agreement, not peace, just the hollow space where her outrage had nowhere to go. Then came the scream, "You're letting your sister die." It actually echoed on. She knew it would. A nurse stood frozen near the vending machine. A security guard down the hall turned his head. Mom's voice carried like a headline. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't move. Because I knew this wasn't the first time she performed grief, and I wouldn't be the one to hand her an encore. From behind the glass wall of room 311, Vera lay in her hospital bed, pale but composed. Chemotherapy had softened the lines of her once impeccable makeup habits, but not her gaze. Her eyes caught mine, held them, and she smiled. Not a smile of gratitude, not relief, not even hope. Ownership. That was always her specialty. She didn't mouth anything. She didn't need to. Her look said everything. Asterisk, I'm still the center. You're still orbiting. Asterisk, a part of me had expected pity from her. Or maybe desperation, but seeing that look smug and satisfied, it did something strange. It unburied something. I stood slowly, gathering what papers I could. My mother's breathing erratic, just moments ago, now steadied, as she turned her rage into a martyr's silence. You'll regret this, Sydney, she said softly, not looking at me. One day, when she's gone, when this family is gone, you'll remember this moment, and you'll hate yourself. I tilted my head, not mocking, just studying. Funny, I murmured. I remember a lot of moments, and none of them looked like family. With that, I turned and walked toward the nurse's station. A few bystanders cleared a path. The nurse who'd been closest met my eyes briefly, opened her mouth as if to speak, then hesitated. I didn't need her words, everything I'd ever wanted to say. Every rebuttal, every explanation, every proof that I wasn't what they painted me to be, was already behind me on the floor, torn and still more intact than what they had tried to build as a family. As I reached the far end of the corridor, I stopped just for a second. The clock on the wall read 10:42 a.m. I remembered that detail because I thought, this is when everything breaks, not when they screamed, but when I didn't. I didn't yell. I didn't collapse. I just walked. And the moment my foot crossed into the adjacent hallway, I knew something that rattled me more than anything else that morning. They weren't here to save Vera, they were here to prove I could still be controlled, but I didn't give them that. And I wouldn't. Not now. Not ever again. The next blow didn't come from my mother. It came from my father. I hadn't even gotten a full step past the nurse's station before I felt the weight of his presence. He didn't call my name, he never did, not with warmth. He just stood there, broad and upright, like the world owed him respect for still being alive. His shadow landed across the tiles in front of me, and I paused because I wanted to believe he might finally say something that wasn't rehearsed, weaponized, or designed to fold me back into silence. Instead, he said it like a fact, not an insult, not a scream, just a statement. You're just a selfish mistake. No raised voice, no accusatory finger, not even a twitch in his jaw. That was the worst part. It wasn't said in anger. It was said like he'd believed it for a long time and had simply run out of reasons to pretend otherwise. I blinked, but I didn't cry. I didn't ask him what he meant. That would have given him the dignity of disbelief. Instead, I let the words hit me like wet cement, pressing down but hardening quickly. I wouldn't let them sink too deep. Behind him, Vietta's room was still lit like a stage. She hadn't moved. That little smirk still etched across her face like a scar she never had to explain. I stepped aside to avoid brushing his shoulder. What used to feel like defiance now just felt like maintenance of my space. My breath, my body walking away. I could feel every year of my life press against my back like a hand trying to push me toward apology. I kept walking. When I reached the water fountain near the family consultation lounge, I stopped not to drink, just to breathe. That's when my mind, traitor that it sometimes was, began flipping through memories like old case files. One vacation when I was 10, Vera got the window seat on the plane. I got the middle seat between my parents and the drink cart. Mom said I was too short to need the view. My 16th birthday, Vera got a car, I got a sweater. Dad said, you don't go anywhere anyway. A college acceptance letter I never got to read because Vera spilled coffee on it before I could open it. She swore it was an accident. Mom believed her. Be grateful, she said. They always said we didn't have to take you in. Even when I didn't know I was adopted, I heard the tone. I knew I was being reminded of a debt I never asked to. Oh, I didn't realize. I'd leaned against the wall until a nurse walked past and glanced my way. Her eyes met mine briefly, unreadably, then kept moving. No one asked if I was okay, honestly. I was glad I didn't want to witness this moment. I needed it to be mine. I pulled my phone from my pocket hands, steady now scrolled through my inbox, and found the subject line I knew by heart. National Donor Match Results Confidential. There it was, dated 6 months ago, from the day I heard Vera was sick. I tapped forward, entered Dr. Holstrom's contact. Added Laura Lame, my friend and emergency backup for every legal mess. I never expected but learned to plan for wrote, reconfirming non-compatibility for records, and hit send. Stared at the screen, at my own name Sydney Hale not Vera's sister, not Coraline's daughter, just Sydney. I exhaled slowly, then stood and walked out the side entrance. Outside, the air had cooled. Early spring in Raleigh, smelled of blooming magnolia, city dust and wet concrete, grounding me in the real world, away from fluorescent lights and old family stories. As I reached the parking garage, I stopped. My car wasn't there. I'd taken a rideshare this morning because I hadn't trusted myself to drive. I called another 5 minutes away, enough time for one more thing. I opened the notes app and typed, if they ever say, I refused without reason. Here's the timeline. *** tested October 19th. Results received October 24th. Notified. National Registry confirms I'm not a match. Then, without overthinking, I added, you cannot donate what you don't have. You cannot love where you're not allowed to exist. You cannot stay where you were never invited. I saved it. The car pulled up. I got in, gave the driver the address of a quiet coffee shop a few blocks away, and sat back, breathing purposefully. By the time I left that coffee shop's corner bench, dusk had crept in. Hospital lights flickered on, one by one. I didn't go back and not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened my message thread with Laura Lay, preparing to send her the proof. She texted first, ***, do you have the proof? I replied with a screenshot. Yes, I'm asking the hospital to document it now. Then, at exactly 10:42 p.m., I walked back inside. Dr. Holstrom greeted me in his office. His tone was clinical, but softer this time. I understand this is personal, but from a medical ethics standpoint, withholding that information wasn't just inappropriate, it was dangerous. I didn't nod. I just handed him the printed emails he'd prepared for me. Thank you, I said. I'll be filing complaints. He stood, offered me a small sympathetic smile, and led me toward the front desk. I looked up right into her eyes. You gave me what you thought I owed you. She blinked, and that was it, the first moment of quiet. Not agreement, not peace, just the hollow space where her outrage had nowhere to go. Then came the scream, "You're letting your sister die." It actually echoed, and she knew it would. A nurse stood frozen near the vending machine. A security guard down the hall turned his head. Mom's voice carried like a headline. I didn't flinch, I didn't cry, I didn't move. Because I knew this wasn't the first time she performed grief, and I wouldn't be the one to hand her an encore. From behind the glass wall of room 311, Vera lay in her hospital bed, pale but composed. Chemotherapy had softened the lines of her once impeccable makeup habits, but not her gaze. Her eyes caught mine, held them, and she smiled. Not a smile of gratitude, not relief, not even hope ownership. That was always her specialty. She didn't mouth anything, she didn't need to. Her look said everything. Asterisk, I'm still the center, you're still orbiting. Asterisk, a part of me had expected pity from her. Or maybe desperation, but seeing that look, smug and satisfied, it did something strange. It unburied something. I stood slowly, gathering what papers I could. My mother's breathing erratic, just moments ago, now steadied as she turned her rage into a martyr's silence. You'll regret this, Sydney, she said softly, not looking at me. One day, when she's gone, when this family is gone, you'll remember this moment and you'll hate yourself. I tilted my head, not mocking, just studying. Funny, I murmured. I remember a lot of moments and none of them looked like family. With that, I turned and walked toward the nurse's station. A few bystanders cleared a path. The nurse who'd been closest met my eyes briefly, opened her mouth as if to speak, then hesitated. I didn't need her words, everything I'd ever wanted to say. Every rebuttal, every explanation, every proof that I wasn't what they painted me to be was already behind me on the floor. Torn and still more intact than what they had tried to build as a family. As I reached the far end of the corridor, I stopped just for a second. The clock on the wall read 10:42 a.m. I remembered that detail because I thought, asterisk, this is when everything breaks, not when they screamed, but when I didn't yell, I didn't collapse. I just walked asterisk, and the moment my foot crossed into the adjacent hallway, I knew something that rattled me more than anything else that morning. They weren't here to save Vera, they were here to prove I could still be controlled, but I didn't give them that, and I wouldn't. Not now, not ever again. The next blow didn't come from my mother, it came from my father. I hadn't even gotten a full step past the nurse's station before I felt the weight of his presence. He didn't call my name, he never did, not with warmth. He just stood there, broad and upright, like the world owed him respect for still being alive. His shadow landed across the tiles in front of me, and I paused because I wanted to believe he might finally say something that wasn't rehearsed, weaponized, or designed to fold me back into silence. Instead, he said it like a fact, not an insult, not a scream, just a statement. You're just a selfish mistake. No raised voice, no accusatory finger, not even a twitch in his jaw. That was the worst part. It wasn't said in anger. It was said like he'd believed it for a long time, and had simply run out of reasons to pretend otherwise. I blinked, but I didn't cry. I didn't ask him what he meant. That would have given him the dignity of disbelief. Instead, I let the words hit me like wet cement, pressing down but hardening quickly. I wouldn't let them sink too deep. Behind him, Vera's room was still lit, like a stage. She hadn't moved. That little smirk still etched across her face like a scar she never had to explain. I stepped aside to avoid brushing his shoulder. What used to feel like defiance now just felt like maintenance of my space, my breath, my body. Walking away, I could feel every year of my life press against my back like a hand trying to push me toward apology. I kept walking. When I reached the water fountain near the family consultation lounge, I stopped not to drink, just to breathe. That's when my mind, traitor that it sometimes was, began flipping through memories like old case files. Asterisk one vacation when I was 10. Vera got the window seat on the plane. I got the middle seat between my parents and the drink cart. Mom said I was too short to need the view. Asterisk my 16th birthday. Vera got a car, I got a sweater. Dad said, you don't go anywhere anyway. The college acceptance letter I never got to read because Vera spilled coffee on it before I could open it. She swore it was an accident. Mom believed her. Be grateful, she said. They always said we didn't have to take you in. Even when I didn't know I was adopted, I heard the tone. I knew I was being reminded of a debt I never asked to owe. I didn't realize. I'd leaned against the wall until a nurse walked past and glanced my way. Her eyes met mine briefly, unreadably, then kept moving. No one asked if I was okay. Honestly, I was glad I didn't want to witness this moment. I needed it to be mine. I pulled my phone from my pocket hands, steady now scrolled through my inbox, and found the subject line I knew by heart. National donor match results confidential. There it was. Dated 6 months ago, from the day I heard Vera was sick. I tapped forward, entered Dr. Holstrom's contact. Added Lorelei, my friend, an emergency backup for every legal mess I never expected but learned to plan for, reconfirming NAN compatibility for records, and hit send. I stared at the screen, at my own name, Sydney Hale. Not Vera's sister, not Corlin's daughter, just Sydney. I exhaled slowly, then stood and walked out the side entrance. Outside, the air had cooled. Early spring in Raleigh smelled of blooming magnolia, city dust, and wet concrete, grounding me in the real world, away from fluorescent lights and old family stories. As I reached the parking garage, I stopped. My car wasn't there. I'd taken a rideshare this morning because I hadn't trusted myself to drive. I called another 5 minutes away, enough time for one more thing. I opened the Notes app and typed, greater than asterisk asterisk if they ever say I refused without reason. Here's the timeline. Asterisk asterisk tested October 19th. Results received October 24th. Notified, National Registry confirms, I'm not a match. Then, without overthinking, I added, greater than you cannot donate what you don't have. You cannot love where you're not allowed to exist. Greater than you cannot stay where you were never invited. I saved it. The car pulled up. I got in, gave the driver the address of a quiet coffee shop a few blocks away, and sat back, breathing purposefully. By the time I left that coffee shop's corner bench, dusk had crept in. Hospital lights flickered on, one by one. I didn't go back and not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened my message thread with Lorelei, preparing to send her the proof. She texted first, asterisk asterisk, do you have the proof? Asterisk asterisk, I replied with a screenshot. Yes, I'm asking the hospital to document it now. Then, at exactly 10:42 p.m., I walked back inside. Dr. Holstrom greeted me in his office. His tone was clinical, but softer this time. I understand this is personal, but from a medical ethics standpoint, withholding that information wasn't just inappropriate, it was dangerous. I didn't nod. I just handed him the printed emails he'd prepared for me. Thank you, I said. I'll be filing complaints. He stood, offered me a small, sympathetic smile, and led me toward the front desk by 3 p.m. the next day. I'd drafted a legal affidavit outlining every detail, the concealed test, the forged power of attorney, the manipulation, the years of lies. At noon, the hospital's ethics board confirmed receipt and promised an immediate investigation. Asterisk, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We take ethical violations seriously. They wrote, ethical violations, asterisk. The words rang clearer than anything my parents ever screamed. That afternoon, I returned to room 311 one last time. Vera looked up from her phone, still in bed, an oxygen line beneath her nose. She didn't smile. You knew I wasn't a match, I said quietly. She shrugged. You always make it about yourself. I took a step closer. I didn't come for you. I came for me. No screams, no tears, just the final unburdening. I walked out past the nurse station, past the elevators, and toward the lobby. On the glass wall beyond, I saw a small group gathering around a podium, the hospital's community gratitude ceremony. Corlin stood at the mic, delivering the same speech. We're grateful for the anonymous donor. I watched as they erased me again, praised my absence, celebrated a phantom savior. I stepped forward, capturing the live stream on my phone. Corlin's voice faltered when she saw me. Vera's image on the monitor froze. I walked up to the podium, my papers in hand. I cleared my throat. My name is Sydney Hale, I began. You never heard it today, but it matters. Popped as I laid out the evidence. Registry results, forged consent, text admissions. A stunned hush fell. Coraline fainted. Merrick whispered for order. I turned and walked away, leaving the echoes of their lies behind me. That night, I sat on my apartment balcony with black coffee, staring at city lights. My phone buzzed. An email from O. She'd sent a Polaroid of my bruised ribs from 2009, the first proof I'd ever had. No greeting, just, you're not alone. I folded the note and slipped it into a drawer marked keepsakes. Not evidence, but a reminder of how far I'd come. My scars were no longer marks of shame. They were maps of survival. Tomorrow, I'd change my name legally. Sydney Hale, no middle names of debt or obligation, just me. And I'd start rewriting the next chapter. One defined not by their secrets, not by what they owed me, but by the life I choose to live in my own skin. They forced me to bleach my skin and inject mercury into my veins for my own good. They said until at 18, I collapsed in a stranger's arms, only to discover that escaping their basement surgeries was just the first battle in a war against bounty hunters. Corrupt doctors, and the adoptive parents who treated me like property instead of a daughter. My adoptive parents made me bleach my skin and wear blue contacts every day because they said raising a brown daughter was their biggest regret. They'd been injecting me with mercury since I was 5. And they'd already paid for facial reconstruction surgery in Thailand for my 18th birthday. So, when I escaped with help from an Indian nurse, they hired a bounty hunter and a Russian doctor who tried to kidnap me in a van to perform emergency surgery. Mom would scrub my face raw each morning, whispering, maybe today we'll find the white girl underneath. They'd desperately wanted a white baby, but were forced to settle for me. They'd been on the waiting list for years, specifically requesting a blonde, blue-eyed infantine. Settling for a brown baby from India felt like failure. They told everyone I was Italian to explain my coloring and forbade me from going outside in summer when I tanned. Mom would cry looking at family photos, saying, you stick out like a stain on our beautiful white family. Dad bought industrial skin lightening creams that burned my face. They started using them before I was old enough to walk. Mom soaked me in milk and lemon baths until my infant skin cracked and bled. Documenting the progress in photo albums labeled Making Catherine, I thought all babies cried during bath time. By age 5, we were flying to Mexico for illegal skin bleaching injections that made me scream for hours. By 10, a Russian doctor was lasering my skin in our basement, while Mom held me down whispering, "White is right, brown is wrong," like a lullaby. At 13, I found Mom's journal behind her perfume bottles. My hands shook as I read entries like, "Increase mercury cream to 3 times daily, seeing results, but she's still too dark. Doctor says organ damage risk is worth it for full transformation." The worst entry was dated for my 18th birthday, full facial reconstruction surgery booked in Thailand. Finally, our real daughter will emerge. They'd already paid the deposit and forged the paperwork. When I began resisting, they escalated. Dad made me eat meals in the garage, saying my awareness of being brown made me contaminated. UV lights in my bedroom burned even worse once I knew their purpose. By age 15, my kidneys were failing from the chemicals I'd ingested when I begged them to stop. Mom stroked my hair and cried, "We're doing this because we love you, don't you want to be beautiful for us?" I sobbed into her lap, confused, because I did want them to love me. "Why am I not enough as I am?" I asked. Dad hugged me tight. "You will be, sweetheart. You will be once we fix you." When the treatments destroyed my hair at 16, Mom held me as I cried and promised the blonde wig would make everything better. "We're so close," she whispered. "Just a little more pain, and you'll be our perfect daughter." Pain is just your brownness leaving the body. As my 18th birthday approached, the torture became frantic. Weekly sandpapering of my nose, eyelids taped around them, a mouthguard cutting my gums to train thinner lips. Dad installed mirrors everywhere, saying every time you see that brown face, remember you're failing us. Family Christmas cards showed a photoshopped white girl who didn't exist. I stopped recognizing myself and started planning my death because it seemed kinder than whatever awaited me in Thailand. Then I collapsed from chemical poisoning and woke up in a hospital. My nurse, an Indian woman named Priya, gasped when she saw the burns covering my body, while my parents claimed I had a rare skin condition. Priya ran toxicology tests that revealed dangerous levels of mercury, hydroquinone, and industrial bleaching agents in my blood. She pulled me aside and whispered, "I know what they're doing to you. Let me help." Priya introduced me to her big Indian family. The first time I sat at their dinner table, I couldn't stop staring at their beautiful brown skin, the skin I was supposed to have. Her grandmother touched my scarred face gently and said something in Hindi I didn't understand. Her eyes filled with tears. Priya translated, "You're still beautiful under all their poison." I sobbed for hours while they held me. First time anyone had touched me with love, instead of trying to change me. With their help, I documented everything and stopped the treatments. When I walked into my parents' kitchen, with my blue contacts thrown away and black hair growing back, Mom threw boiling water at me, screaming, "Get that thing out of my house." I ran to the basement, with surgical equipment waiting. I escaped through the basement window and fled to Priya's house. But my parents launched a manhunt. They filed missing person reports, claiming I'd been kidnapped by Indian traffickers, then offered a reward, and posted edited photos describing a mentally ill Swedish-Italian girl suffering delusions. When that failed, they found me again and attempted a midnight kidnapping. Dad broke down Priya's door with a crowbar while Mom screamed, "She's our property. We paid for her." They'd brought the Russian doctor in his van to perform emergency surgery to make her unrecognizable as Indian. The doctor held a ketamine syringe while Dad sneered, "We'll say, you kidnapped a white girl and tried to turn her brown." Priya's brothers tackled Dad. Her father blocked the van with his car. The doctor fled on foot. Neighbors poured into the street. Mom clawed at Priya's mother, screaming about property rights. But Priya's grandmother stepped between them with a cricket bat held high. The police arrived within minutes. My parents collapsed into tears, claiming I was mentally ill. Dad produced falsified medical documents, stating I suffered from racial dysphoria and needed immediate hospitalization. The Russian doctor had vanished. I spent 3 hours at the station while they spun elaborate lies. But Priya arrived with screenshots of Mom's journal entries. The police released me to Priya's family custody temporarily. My parents left, promising it wasn't over. Dad muttering about conservatorship papers. Mom shrieking about ungrateful investments. Back at Priya's, her family formed a protective circle around me, but we knew my parents would return. They began again the next morning. Private investigators photographing everyone who entered Priya's house, filing CPS complaints that Priya's family was holding me hostage. Contacting my old school to spread rumors I'd joined a cult. Harassing Priya's workplace and temple. Following her younger siblings. Distributing my photo to every clinic and pharmacy in the area, hoping to catch me. Seeking dialysis for my failing kidneys. Priya's family rallied. Her brothers kept 24-hour shifts. Her mother cooked healing foods and applied turmeric to my burns. Her grandmother taught me Hindi prayers and held me when nightmares woke me screaming. 2 weeks in, my health deteriorated dramatically. I needed dialysis, but any clinic could be watched. Priya used her nursing connections to arrange secret treatment at a distant clinic. We left at 3 a.m., took back roads, switched cars twice, and lost a black sedan that had followed us for miles. My parents escalated, hiring investigators to stake out Priya's house around the clock, calling relatives I'd never met to claim I'd been kidnapped. offering rewards, sending letters boasting of the white daughter they could have had, tallying their $500,000 investment in my transformation and demanding reimbursement. If I didn't return home, I documented everything, obsessively mails, letters, surveillance photos, my scars, blood tests. 3 weeks into hiding, they filed for conservatorship, claiming I was mentally incompetent. I had 5 days to appear in court. Priya's family pooled money for a lawyer, but we knew the odds were stacked. I spent the days in a haze of fear and preparation. Priya's grandmother prayed constantly and pressed sacred threads into my hands. The night before the hearing, I sat in Priya's kitchen, surrounded by photos of a fictional white daughter, every image digitally lightened. I cried, feeling hollow, as Priya made tea and her grandmother spoke of survival. They tried to make us white too, she said, but we survived. You will survive. In court, my parents' lawyer painted them as devoted, the treatments as cultural integration therapy, my resistance as mental illness. They produced bank statements, medical records, and doctored adoption papers. The judge listened skeptically. Priya's grandmother arrived with printed journal entries revealing the mercury dosages and surgical plans. The judge denied the conservatorship, but ordered a psychiatric evaluation. My parents smiled triumphantly, knowing they could manipulate any therapist. I left court legally free, but unprotected from their next move. Dad offered a compromise of milder treatments. He squeezed my shoulder, describing a new basement setup with restraints. Priya's brother intervened. The message was clear. They would never accept me. I realized no legal victory would shield me. Their obsession was limitless. Priya's family, exhausted and endangered, prepared to move me through a network of informal safe houses, each family knowing only the next link, protecting me and hundreds of other fugitives. For months, I hid, moving from home to home, from city to city, each with a new alias, never staying long enough to form attachments. My health was a constant battle: dialysis, and secret clinics, herbal remedies. Weeks without care. They hired bounty hunters, recovery specialists, publicity campaigns, websites, social media blow-ups, and even aerial surveillance, spending fortunes to recapture me. Each attempt drove me deeper into hidden communities. I learned survival skills, foraging, isolation, and misdirection. I was chased into the wilderness, cornered by armed men, assaulted with ketamine. Syringes set still, I refused to return. Finally, a domestic violence shelter disguised as a clinic offered real safety and medical care. They helped me change my legal identity, move to a new city, and rebuild a life. I trained as a medical assistant, then as a patient advocate, using my trauma to educate and protect others. I married a nurse who accepted me fully. We fostered children with their own stories of abuse. My parents' foundation for racial integration collapsed amid scandal and lawsuits. Their wealth vanished. Their reputation lay in ruins. When they died still, insisting they'd only ever tried to help, I felt only relief. 10 years after my escape, I stood before medical professionals, sharing my story publicly for the first time. My scars, once sources of shame, became symbols of survival. Policies changed, training programs launched, survivors reached out. I reconnected with my birth family in India by letter and, one day, hope to meet them in person. My life today, a loving marriage, meaningful work, chosen family, and hard-won peace. My scars remain maps of endurance, reminders that I belong to myself. My parents tried to erase me. Instead, I protected others. They sought to own my body. I reclaimed it. They tortured me in the name of love. I transformed that pain into purpose. This is my revenge. Living fully, freely, and fiercely as the brown woman they could never break. And Lieutenant Colonel Taman Locock steps off the cab with his discharge papers in hand. He expects welcome, but instead finds his grandfather's home stolen by forged wills, shell companies, and the betrayal of his own blood, now trading cyber battles for courtroom skirmishes. He must marshal every ounce of his veteran discipline and digital prowess to unmask a conspiracy led by family, reclaim his inheritance, and prove that the war for truth can be fought and won on home soil. My name is Taman Locock. I served 25 years in Cyber Command, rose to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, and spent most of my adult life navigating digital battlefields that no one ever saw. I've decoded terrorist networks, shut down foreign intelligence breaches, and testified in classified hearings before senators who couldn't pronounce half the acronyms I lived with daily. But none of that prepared me for what it felt like to stand on the sidewalk outside the house my grandfather built, and be treated like a TRESPASSER. It was late September. I had just stepped out of a cab, my discharge papers still warm in my bag. The weight of silence pressed against my chest. The porch light flickered above me, the kind of faint glow that used to mean welcome. Now it felt like surveillance. My sister Delilah answered the intercom. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just looked down from the top of the stairs and said flatly, "I'm calling the police." At first I thought it was some kind of joke. Then I saw the way her hand hovered over her phone, already dialing. "You can't just show up here," she snapped. "This isn't your home anymore, Taman. You left. You disappeared." "I just came back from service," I said, my voice catching on the last word. Brittle as dry leaves. "I thought maybe I could see Mom." "She doesn't want to see you," Delilah replied, her expression hard as stone. "Neither does Dad." Then she said something that hit harder than any battlefield blast. "You're not in the will. You're not even on the deed." 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. One officer was young, the other wore a tight military buskit. Recognition flickered in their eyes when they looked at me in uniform. Lieutenant Colonel Lowcock, the younger officer asked. I nodded, but it didn't matter. This property belongs to Delilah Thatcher and Richard Lowcock, he said. There's no record of you having legal access. I stepped back as the gate closed again. In that moment, I realized something far colder than war had just begun. I wasn't fighting enemies this time. I was fighting blood and I would not lose. I didn't drive away that night. I parked 2 blocks down and sat in the dark with my coat zipped to my chin, the streetlights pulling faint halos onto the pavement. The house, my grandfather's house, still loomed at the end of the lane. Its windows glowed soft amber, like nothing had changed. But everything had. The front lawn, once dotted with grandma's hydrangeas, now held a single crooked sign. For sale, private listing. I stared at it until the words blurred. I hadn't cried in years, not when I deployed. Not when we lost soldiers in Bahrain. Not even when I came home to an empty apartment and a military pension that felt more like a tombstone than a thank you. But that night something cracked. The place that was supposed to anchor me, where I'd climbed trees, memorized Morse code with Grandpa, and slept under a ceiling of glow-in-the-dark stars, was now being scrubbed of my existence, and no one inside seemed to care. I stayed in the car until morning. My uniform, still neatly pressed from the discharge ceremony, had creases that dug into my skin like insults. I watched lights flicker on inside the house around dawn. A figure moved in the living room. I knew the posture before I saw the face. My father, still thin, still upright, like he ran boardrooms in his sleep. He never once looked toward the street. I pulled out my phone. I wasn't sure what I expected. A message from Mom. Maybe a breadcrumb of acknowledgement. But there was only one unread text. Asterisk, asterisk, return to base. There's nothing here for you. Asterisk, asterisk. I let the phone fall into the cup holder and stared at the dashboard until the sun edged above the rooftops. I wasn't going back to base. I wasn't built for surrender. At 9 a.m., I walked into a small cafe just off Jefferson Street. Ruth Clay was already there, sitting in the back corner in a black blazer that made her look like she hadn't aged a day since undergrad. We'd shared a dorm. Once a short-lived friendship interrupted by duty and time zones. But when she looked up and saw me, something in her expression cracked open recognition, maybe regret. She didn't ask how I'd been. She just turned her tablet toward me. Thought you might want to see this, she said. On the screen was a real estate listing. 1450 Windmere Lane, my grandfather's address, listed under Ravencrest Holdings LLC. I didn't sign anything, I said. She nodded. That's what I figured. She tapped again, revealing a property transfer filed 3 months ago. My name, Tammin Lockock, appeared on the seller line. That's not my signature. No, she said quietly, it's not. But we're going to prove that, and just like that. My battle had a shape of war, not on foreign soil, but buried deep in family lies, forged ink, and one stolen home, and I was ready to fight. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The hum of the cafe soft against the clatter of coffee cups. Ruth had already pulled up half a dozen documents, property transfers, notary stamps, filing records. She moved like a lawyer who'd done this before. I, on the other hand, felt like I was learning a new language, one that used betrayal as punctuation. This notary, she said, tapping the corner of the screen, was suspended last year for falsifying DMV affidavits. The same signature shows up on your deed transfer. My jaw clenched. So they didn't just steal the house, they planned this. They did more than plan it, Ruth said, flipping to another file. They moved fast and they made it look clean. I shook my head. Delilah said I wasn't on the deed, that I'd been cut out of the will. Ruth looked at me carefully. Your grandfather left the house to you, didn't he? I nodded. He told me in person, said it out loud the day before he died, but you never saw the paperwork. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a printed county registry record. They filed a new will a month later. That one leaves everything to your father and Delilah. My stomach turned. They forged the will, could be, or coerced it. Either way, it's not consistent with the version you remember. I kept copies, digital backups, maybe even his old video journal. Ruth's eyes lit up. If we find even one inconsistency, timestamps, handwriting, witness credentials, it's enough to open a civil claim. I leaned back in my chair. They told me to my face that I didn't matter, that the house wasn't mine. And now I find out they buried a trail of fake documents under a shell company. Ravencrest is the buffer, Ruth said. Brian Colloway's name shows up on Associated Logistics filings. My hand stiffened. Delilah's husband, always traveling. Never clear about where. Ruth opened her legal pad and began jotting notes. I'll file an injunction to freeze the title. We'll subpoena the notary, pull all land records for Windmere Lane, and start tracing Ravencrest's ownership tree. It was methodical. Ruth moved with the precision of someone who didn't flinch at power plays. And yet, I couldn't help feeling like a child again, locked out of her own house, watching the adults steal Christmas. They think I won't fight back, I said. They don't know you, Ruth replied. That night, I drove past the house again. The porch light was off. The hydrangeas were gone. The place looked polished and wrong, like someone had tried to erase the memory of a life, and missed only the ghost in the sidewalk cracks. They took my home on paper, but I had a pen, and I was going to write myself back in. The next morning, Ruth called me early. I pulled the utility records for the house, she said. Power spikes like industrial load for what? I asked. No permits filed. no business license, no renovations on record. That's the thing, she replied. But someone's definitely running equipment that shouldn't be in a residential basement. The silence between us sharpened. I knew that kind of vague, shadow, powerful threat, quiet, and always hiding in plain sight. I need to see it myself, I said. I figured you'd say that, Ruth warned. Be careful, Tammin. That evening, I parked 2 blocks from the house again. Windows cracked just enough to let the fall air bite my skin. I had no plan, just instinct. Around 10:45 p.m., a man appeared across the street, mid-40s, baseball cap pulled low, jacket zipped tight. He didn't look at me, just leaned casually against a lamppost. When he walked away, I noticed something wedged under my windshield wiper, a plain piece of paper. No envelope, 1 line in all caps. Asterisk, asterisk, if you're really Tammin, meet me at alley, 9:11 p.m. come alone. Asterisk, asterisk, I hesitated for less than a second. The alley behind Windmere Lane was barely lit, chain link fences, old recycling bins, and the faint smell of oil and dust. He was already waiting, weathered face, mechanic's hands. A Marine Corps tattoo faded on his forearm. I knew your grandfather, he said, before I could speak. Name's Ethan. I fix cars at McRae down the road. I've lived here long enough to know when something ain't right. I stared at him, not trusting easily. They say you're unstable, that you've got issues from combat. That's what your sister tells the neighbors. I didn't flinch. Let them talk. But I've seen men come at night, he said. Vans, no plates, always black. They back into the alley, unload crates, real quiet. Always the same guy watching, real tall, wears gloves, never speaks. He paused. Your sister's husband, Brian, he's there every time. Tightness gripped my chest. Did you see what they brought in? Couldn't get close, but it ain't furniture. Boxes get locked inside that basement door, and then power use jumps through the roof. I slipped a small audio recorder from my coat pocket and held it tight. I need to see it myself. That's not smart, he warned. These aren't folks who care about laws. I don't care if they care, I said. That night I dressed in black, clipped a camera to my collar, and returned to the alley alone. I stayed low, using a half-burned fence for cover. At 12:30 a.m., I heard the first low engine growled. 2 black trucks rolled in, lights off. 4 men climbed out, one of them was Brian. He moved with confidence, gesturing toward the back entrance, like he owned it. I recorded everything, their movements, their faces, the time. Then Brian stepped into the warehouse and I followed. I couldn't get close enough to see inside, but I found a vent with a clear audio path. I slipped the recorder inside and waited. Voices filtered through the metal. Greater than officer finds out, no. Warnings, favor the tie. I stopped breathing. That voice, I knew it. Southern cadence, gravel-lined, slow and deliberate. My father, he wasn't just complicit, he was leading it. I backed away, handshaking around the recorder. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I did what I'd been trained to do. I documented, I cataloged. I disappeared into the shadows because now I had proof. And the war had a voice. By morning, the recorder was gone. I'd returned to the alley just after sunrise, hoping to retrieve it before anyone noticed, but the vent was clean. No device, no trace, I'd ever been there. That told me 2 things. They knew I was watching, and they were watching back an hour later. I got the message, no name, no greeting. Asterisk, asterisk, you're playing with fire. I have your military psych file. Want to see what it says about you? Asterisk. Asterisk, I stared at the screen, breath frozen, heart hammering. Whoever sent it had access to restricted archives and they wanted me rattled, but they underestimated what kind of soldier I was. I didn't delete the message. I forwarded it to Ruth and to Isaac Ing, a cybersecurity analyst I'd served with during a joint task force in Ramstein. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, but he replied in 6 minutes. Asterisk, asterisk, pull everything. Start building the chain. Don't wait. Asterisk, asterisk, that night, my apartment turned into a war room. I powered up 2 laptops, a backup server, and 3 encrypted drives, the documents I'd stored over the years, copies of emails. Scans of property files, encrypted call logs were no longer sentimental scraps. They were ammunition. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. A contact pinged in. Kayla, a digital forensics expert Ruth had on standby, joined our private Zoom call, no face, voice modulated. She specialized in scrubbing the lies others left behind. I got your data packet, she said. Nice encryption. Let's see what the liars missed. She dove into IP logs, metadata chains, Financial Times comps. Isaac traced shell company transactions. Within hours, they had a map of Ravencrest, Brian's logistics firm, Delilah's personal account, and a series of midnight wire transfers that stank of laundering. Then, Isaac froze. Wet the signature on the leasing contract. It's your father's. He authorized warehouse storage under Ravencrest. I leaned back. The air sucked from the room. He hadn't just known, he'd signed off on all of it. I'm filing an injunction, Ruth said. Forgery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit federal contract abuse. We go to court now. I stared at the screen where my father's name sat under land use supervisor. They stole my house. Now, I would take back the ground they stood on one paper at a time. 2 days later, we walked straight through the front gates, no more circling the block, no more hiding in shadows. Ruth and I pulled into the driveway of the house my grandfather left me, the house they'd stolen with forged signatures and offshore money. The Lexus was there, so was Brian's black F-150, a perfect morning for truth. I wore my uniform, not because I needed to but because they needed to see it. Ruth straightened her jacket and handed me the envelope. You ready? I've been ready since the day they called me a stranger. I rang the doorbell. Delilah answered, face freshly painted, a performance smile already in place until she saw me. Her lips twitched. Then she saw Ruth and the envelope. The color drained from her face. We're here to serve you with a court injunction, Ruth said calmly, placing the documents into Delilah's hand. Effective immediately. All property transfers, leases, and financial movements tied to this address are frozen. The county land office is aware. Delilah stared at the envelope like it might bite her. You can't do this. Brian stepped into the hallway. His tone was slow, oily. You really want to go down this road, Tammin? I met his eyes. I was trained to walk roads like this. I know how to navigate darkness. He smirked. You don't know who you're fighting. I said. A logistics fraudster, a forged deed accomplice, and a coward who used my name to win federal contracts. His jaw tightened. You're unstable. I've been evaluated. You'll see the results entered into evidence. Ruth stepped in. And if you speak another word of intimidation, we'll file for witness harassment. Delilah clutched the envelope, like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. This is our house. No, I said. It was mine before you rewrote history. We turned and walked back to the car. The door slammed behind us hard and hollow. In the passenger seat, Ruth exhaled. They'll hit back. I looked straight ahead. They already did. Now it's our turn. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation of land, of truth, of a name they tried to erase. The courtroom was quiet. No drama, no shouting. Just the steady pulse of federal process. I sat behind the witness table in uniform, back straight, ribbons sharp, eyes calm. When the prosecutor asked me to explain what happened, I didn't waver. They forged my signature on a deed transferring my grandfather's house, I said. They created false financial trails, funneled government funds through shell accounts, and used my military clearance codes to access contracts they were never qualified to touch. Delilah stared at her hands. Brian whispered to his attorney. My father, Richard, stared past me, as if he believed that if he didn't look directly at me, none of this would stick. But it did. The judge reviewed each piece of evidence. The signature inconsistencies, the IP logs, the wire transfers, the notaries, suspension, the recorded voice of my father gravel, lined and unmistakable. If the officer finds out no warning sever the tie, then came the question that mattered. In your opinion, Colonel Locock, the prosecutor asked, was this a deliberate conspiracy? Yes, I said. They didn't just try to erase my name. They used it and they built an empire on silence. The court ruled Delilah 6 years. Brian and Richard Locock 10 years. No parole. Outside, reporters waited. I didn't speak to them, but I saw the veterans, some in faded jackets, some leaning on canes nodding quietly as I passed. One reached out, his hand steady. Colonel Locock, he said. You reminded them, we still stand. I nodded. We don't stay erased. Weeks later, I visited the Defense Service Library. It smelled of polished stone and quiet memory. On the wall of honor, carved into black granite, was my name. Asterisk, asterisk, call. Tammin Lockett Sieber, command. 1998 to 2023, asterisk, asterisk, no one could take that from me, not my father, not Delilah, not anyone who tried to make me forget what I stood for. I stood for truth, not vengeance. I walked out of the courtroom not with their house, not with their money, but with my name, my honor, and the kind of justice that doesn't come with noise. It comes with clarity. In that silence, I stood unshaken. Imagine discovering the person you should be able to trust most, your stepmom. Your dad's licensed grief counselor has secretly installed cameras in your bedroom and streamed you sleeping to hundreds of strangers. When you begged your dad to see the truth, he brushed it off saying, she's the professional, you're just confused. Now her license is revoked, but the scars run deep, your privacy shattered, your family torn apart, and your fight to reclaim your life, only just beginning. My stepmom installed cameras in my bedroom for safety, then live-streamed me sleeping to hundreds of strangers. When I begged my dad to believe me, just look at the site himself. He rubbed his temples and said, she's a licensed therapist, you're just confused. I didn't say a word. That was 4 months ago. This morning she was crying in a courthouse hallway, clutching a revoked medical license. My mom died giving birth to my baby sister. Neither of them made it. I was 17, standing in the hospital hallway when they told us, watching my dad collapse against the wall. 6 months later, he married Patricia, his grief counselor. She moved in with her bright pink throw pillows and her psychology degrees, talking about healthy healing environments while boxing up mom's things. Patricia started her campaign immediately. Teen boys process grief through anger. She'd tell dad over dinner, watching me cut my steak. Dad nodded along, still hollow-eyed, desperate for someone to tell him how to fix us. Within weeks, she'd convinced him I was a ticking time bomb. Statistics show boys who lose their mothers violently often develop aggressive tendencies. She'd say, rubbing his shoulder while I sat right there. The cameras came first. For everyone's protection, Patricia explained. Installing them in my bedroom, the hallway, even facing my bathroom door, Dad helped her mount them, avoiding my eyes. Next, she locked up my baseball equipment, my hockey gear, even my old skateboard potential weapons, she called them. My bedroom door lock disappeared overnight. No secrets in a healing household, she'd say. Dad started flinching when I moved too quickly, keeping Patricia between us like a shield. I'd reach for the salt and he'd tense up. I'd walk into a room and he'd find reasons to leave. I started sleeping in my closet to avoid the cameras, using my backpack as a pillow. But I never missed visiting Mom's grave on Saturdays. I'd bike 8 miles each way, bringing fresh daisies, her favorites. I'd tell her about Patricia's latest interventions, about how Dad looked at me like I was dangerous. Patricia redecorated obsessively, painting every wall bright pink, because color psychology promotes calm in troubled minds. She threw out Mom's reading chair, her recipe booksy and the quilt Grandma made. Holding on to the past prevents healing, she'd say, replacing everything with her modern, sterile furniture. Patricia monitored everything: my phone, my laptop, my school emails. She'd read my texts aloud at dinner, analyzing them for concerning patterns. When I complained, she'd touch Dad's arm and remind him about teenage male volatility statistics. I helped her redecorate, carried her boxers, smiled when she introduced me as her special project to her colleagues. I played the grateful stepson while dying inside, because fighting back would only prove her point. Senior year, I applied to Mom's alma mater in secret, using the school library computers. When the acceptance letter arrived, Patricia got to it first. That night at dinner, she placed it on the table like evidence. College would be too stressful, she announced. Environmental changes can trigger violent episodes in at-risk youth. Dad stared at his plate. What do you think? I asked him directly. He glanced at Patricia. Patricia knows best. She's the professional. She smiled, tearing my acceptance letter in half. We'll look into online programs more structured, safer. I broke that night. My friend Craig found me at the park late, on the swings where Mom used to push me. He took me to his house, let me crash on his couch. The next day, everything shattered. Craig pulled me aside after school, his face pale. Dude, you need to see this. He showed me his phone, a website with videos of me in my room, clothes, sleeping time stamped from Patricia's cameras. The site was subscription-based, with hundreds of paying viewers, live stream schedules, comment sections full of requests. I threw up in Craig's bathroom. We decided to break into my old home and find more evidence against her, then go to the police. Patricia's laptop history showed she'd been posting the videos for months. Her psychology notes were actually fantasy scenarios viewers requested. Troubled teen strips down after nightmare. Angry boy works out shirtless. Each video titled like case studies. I couldn't go home, couldn't warn Dad without alerting Patricia. If she knew I'd discovered the site, she'd delete everything before I could get proof. I stayed with Craig for 3 days, skipping school, trying to figure out what to do. Patricia must have noticed the drop in viewers. She called Dad, spinning her story. He's having an episode classic flight response that could turn aggressive. Then she escalated. Craig's mom got a call from the police. Patricia had reported me as a dangerous runaway with violent tendencies, claiming I threatened her and needed immediate intervention. The officers who came to Craig's house looked skeptical as I explained, showing them screenshots Craig had saved. They said I could file charges, but Patricia had already taken the videos down, without the actual site. It was my word against a licensed psychologist. If I went home to gather evidence, she'd destroy it. If I stayed away, she'd keep escalating. The officer handed me his card. Document everything you can. We'll need proof. I stood in Craig's driveway watching them leave, knowing Patricia had won. She'd isolated me from my dad, stolen my future, and turned me into a product tan somehow. She'd made it all look like therapy. I sat in Craig's car, staring at the printouts he'd made from Patricia's laptop history. The forum post made my stomach turn. Grief Counselors United. A private discussion board where Patricia shared details about me for months. Clinical language barely disguised the personal information. Subject exhibits typical avoidance patterns. Flight response confirms deterioration as predicted. Craig drove us to the pharmacy while I scrolled through more posts. Patricia was backing up her research files, adding notes about my behavior. The timestamp on her latest entry was from that morning. She documented my absence as evidence of escalating instability. Inside the pharmacy, I headed straight for the prescription counter. Dad's new medication sat waiting in a white paper bag. The pharmacist pulled it down just as Patricia appeared beside me, reaching for the same shelf. She carried a stack of manila folders, labeled with patient numbers. The pharmacist glanced between us. Patricia smiled professionally while I stood frozen. She picked up her own prescription bag. The label was visible for a moment. Anti-anxiety medication, same as Dad's, but a different dosage. His father's prescription, Patricia told the pharmacist. I'm managing his medications now. She showed a laminated card. Medical, proxy. The pharmacist nodded and made a note. The dosage has increased quite a bit from last month. Make sure he's not experiencing any confusion or memory issues. Patricia's hand tightened on her folders. Everything's being monitored carefully. The words burst out before I could stop them. She's recording me for her sick research. My voice cracked, garbled with emotion. The pharmacist stepped back. Other customers turned to stare. A teenager yelling at a well-dressed professional woman about privacy. I could see how it looked. Patricia's expression shifted to concern the perfect performance of a worried stepmother. He's having a difficult time, she explained calmly. Grief manifests in many ways. I grabbed Dad's prescription and left, my face burning. In the parking lot. Craig was talking on his phone. His mom's voice carried through the speaker. Patricia's blog about parenting through trauma. Her insights about teenage behavior are invaluable, she said. I slumped in the passenger seat. Patricia's influence was spreading beyond my family. Craig ended the call, looking troubled. I have to take you somewhere, I told him. Dad had a doctor's appointment in an hour. Craig hesitated. What about confronting Patricia at her office? Getting actual evidence. The choice felt impossible. Confront her directly and risk her destroying evidence, or check on Dad, who'd been increasingly confused lately. The prescription bag felt heavy in my lap. Patricia had been managing his medications for weeks. His father's health first. I decided at the medical building. I found Dad already in the waiting room. He looked up when I entered, blinking slowly as if trying to focus. His shirt was buttoned wrong. Weren't you at school? He asked, words slightly slurred. Before I could answer, Patricia emerged from the doctor's office, holding a clipboard. She'd arrived before us, already inside discussing Dad's case. The receptionist handed her more forms. I'm listed as his medical proxy now, Patricia announced, not looking at me. Given his cognitive decline from grief, someone needs to make medical decisions. Dad nodded absently, not processing what she'd said. I watched him struggle to sign where Patricia pointed. His signature looked shaky, different from just weeks ago. The doctor called us back. Patricia positioned herself between Dad and me, guiding him with a hand on his elbow. In the examination room, she answered most of the doctor's questions, while Dad sat quietly. He's been forgetting things, Patricia explained, missing time. Confusion about recent events, classic symptoms of grief, induced cognitive impairment. The doctor made notes while examining Dad when he asked Dad about his medications. Patricia produced a typed list from her folder. I've been managing them to ensure compliance. Dad tried to answer a question about his sleep patterns, but got confused halfway through. I reached over to steady him when he swayed slightly. Patricia immediately started documenting on her phone. Please don't agitate him, she said sharply. He becomes disoriented when overwhelmed. The doctor suggested neurological tests. Patricia agreed immediately, already pulling out her calendar to schedule follow-ups. Dad just nodded, trusting her completely. Back in the waiting room, my phone buzzed with messages from 3 different numbers. The school counselor, Craig's mom, and an unknown caller. Patricia watched me check the screen, making another note. Craig texted that his parents had found the forum printouts in his room. They wanted to talk to me immediately. Another crisis added to the growing list. The school counselor's voicemail was brief but concerning. They needed me to come in for a psychiatric evaluation based on recent behavioral concerns. Patricia's influence was reaching into every corner of my life. Dad dozed off in his chair, while Patricia filled out more forms. I watched her forge his signature on several documents, her handwriting steadier than his had been. She caught me looking and smiled. Your father needs help, she said quietly. I'm the only one providing it. The rage built in my chest, but I forced it down. Any reaction would become evidence in her files. Every emotion I showed got twisted into proof of instability. Craig's mom called again. Patricia had offered to provide pro bono therapy for my escalating condition. The same woman who'd been live streaming my private moments to strangers. The system designed to protect people was being weaponized against me. She's building a case for involuntary commitment, I told Craig. And I've got no credible adult support left. The weight of it crashed down. Patricia controlled Dad's medications, his medical decisions, and his perception of reality. She'd influenced my school, Craig's family, and built a professional network that validated her every move. The forum posts were just one piece of a much larger operation. Craig drove while I stared at the prescription bag. Inside were pills that were supposed to help Dad's anxiety, but seemed to be making him worse. Patricia's therapeutic medication management was keeping him docile and confused. What are you going to do? Craig asked. I thought about Mom's grave, the daisies I'd left there last Saturday. She trusted the system too, sought help when she needed it. Patricia had been her counselor for 2 months before she died. The connection felt important, but I couldn't prove anything yet. Patricia's draft article surfaced in my mind. Therapeutic interventions for violent grief in male adolescents. She was documenting everything for publication, using clinical language to disguise personal details. My life reduced to a case study. The school loomed ahead. The counselor would be waiting with Patricia's assessment, ready to pathologize normal teenage responses to extraordinary manipulation. Each professional convinced they were helping while enabling Patricia's agenda. Drop me at the library instead. I told Craig, I need to research something. If Patricia's building a case against me, I need to build one against her. But I had to be smarter than Mom had been. Whatever she'd discovered about Patricia, she hadn't been able to act on it in time. Now I was racing against the same clock. The forum posts were evidence, but not enough. Patricia's control over Dad's medications was concerning, but she had legal documents supporting it. The live streaming was criminal, but the site was gone. I needed something bigger, something that would make professionals question Patricia's motives. Despite her credentials, the Thursday support group met tomorrow. I needed somewhere to sleep tonight. I remembered an old maintenance shed near the cemetery that grounds rarely checked. Walking there, I noticed Patricia's influence spreading further. A neighbor crossed the street when she saw me coming. Parents at the playground pulled their children closer. The shed was musty but dry. I spread out my evidence by phone light, organizing everything chronologically. Patricia's pattern emerged clearly across multiple families, but patterns weren't proof. My phone died around midnight. No charger, no way to track Patricia's escalating posts. Morning brought hunger and stiffness. I walked to a gas station, bought food with my last $20, and noticed my photo on a missing person flyer by the register, experiencing psychological distress. Contact family immediately. The Thursday support group met in a church basement. I arrived early, watching others filter in. A woman with tired eyes, a man clutching a folder of documents, a couple holding hands tightly, all carrying the same haunted look I saw in my reflection. The facilitator introduced herself as someone who'd lost custody of her daughter to a therapist who documented her into looking unstable. Stories emerged slowly. A therapist who'd convinced a father his grief made him dangerous to his children. A counselor who'd isolated a widow from her support system while managing her medications. Each story different in details, identical in pattern. When my turn came, I showed my evidence. The room grew quiet as I explained the cameras, the live streaming, Patricia's systematic destruction of my life. Several people nodded in recognition. An older man spoke up. His nephew had been Patricia's patient 6 years ago in another state. The boy ended up institutionalized after Patricia documented months of escalating behaviors. The family tried to fight, but lacked resources. The facilitator took notes, explaining that while they couldn't take official action, they maintained a database of complaints. Patricia's name appeared multiple times across different states. She'd surrendered licenses voluntarily before investigations could complete, then relocated and started again. A woman offered practical advice: document everything but assume Patricia was doing the same. Avoid confrontation that could be twisted into aggression. Focus on protecting Dad rather than exposing Patricia. Courts responded better to protective actions than accusations. The group ended with exchanged contacts and quiet encouragement. I wasn't alone anymore, even if none of us held power within the system. Walking back toward downtown, I decided to check on Dad despite the risk. Patricia would be at her afternoon clients. I could assess how bad his condition had become. The house felt different. Patricia had rearranged furniture again, creating clear sight lines from her office to every room. New cameras blinked in corners. She was preparing for something. Dad sat in the living room staring at nothing. His hands shook as he tried to hold a coffee mug. Empty medication bottles lined the kitchen counter. Patricia's therapeutic management in action. In her office, I discovered something worse. Patricia had been corresponding with Mom's old OBGYN, requesting records for a research project about prenatal anxiety and tragic outcomes. She was trying to posthumously diagnose Mom with conditions that would support her theories. A car door slammed outside. Patricia was home early. I slipped out the back door as she entered through the front, but not before seeing Dad struggle to stand and greet her. She guided him to his chair with practiced care, the perfect image of a devoted wife. That night in the shed, I made a decision. The support group had given me contacts for lawyers who understood therapeutic abuse, journalists who'd covered similar cases, and advocates who worked outside official channels. Patricia's emergency intervention was tomorrow. I had hours to act. I spent the night writing everything down, not emotional appeals, but simple chronological facts, times, dates, documents. Patterns, the kind of evidence that spoke for itself. Dawn brought the sound of sirens, multiple cars heading toward my neighborhood. Patricia had made her move. I reached the house to find police cars outside. Patricia stood on the porch, tears streaming down her face as she explained how I threatened her during a psychotic break. Dad stood behind her, confused and swaying, mumbling agreement to whatever she said. The officers approached carefully. I kept my hands visible, movement slow. One recognized me from the support group. His sister had shared her story yesterday. He couldn't help openly, but he made sure I was processed by the book. No rough handling. No escalation at the station. I asked for my phone call, on a lawyer, but the advocate from the support group. She arrived within an hour with a civil rights attorney specializing in false imprisonment cases. Patricia's emergency commitment petition fell apart quickly. She'd claimed I'd threatened her, but security footage from neighboring houses showed I'd never approached the front door. Her timeline didn't match. The weapons she'd photographed in my room were sports equipment any teenager would own. The attorney had pulled Patricia's history across multiple state-surrendered licenses, sealed complaints, families who'd fled rather than fight pattern, evidence that even protective services couldn't ignore. By afternoon, investigators were taking my statement seriously. The live streaming site had been traced through cached data. Financial records showed Patricia's income from subscriptions. The forum post demonstrated premeditation. Dad's medical evaluation revealed dangerous medication interactions. Patricia had been prescribed the same medication she was giving him, stockpiling her own while overdosing him. The fog was lifting as doctors adjusted his treatment. Patricia's colleagues distanced themselves as evidence mounted. Her carefully built network crumbled when faced with legal scrutiny. Her image couldn't withstand documentation of actual crimes. The commitment hearing became an investigation into Patricia. Her tears seemed genuine as she insisted she'd been helping, that her research would save lives. The delusion ran deep. She truly believed her own narrative. Other families came forward. Benja's family had been waiting for someone else to speak first. Patricia's sister confirmed memory gaps and medication management. The pattern was undeniable. Dad's recovery was slow. Each day brought more clarity but also horror at what he'd enabled. We started family therapy with a carefully vetted counselor who understood trauma and coercive control. Patricia faced multiple charges. The legal process would take months, maybe years. But she'd lost her power to practice, to access vulnerable families, to document children for her twisted research. I returned to school with support services in place. Some people still believed Patricia's narrative, but others recognized the truth. Craig's family apologized, understanding how they'd been manipulated. The support group celebrated quietly, another predator stopped, another family protected. We all knew Patricia wasn't unique. The system that enabled her still existed. I visited Mom's grave with fresh daisies and updates. Her journal had helped build the case. She'd seen through Patricia but hadn't lived to stop her. Now her evidence had protected others. Dad sold the house to many cameras, to many memories. We found a small apartment near his work, starting over with careful trust and ongoing therapy. Patricia's trial revealed the full scope. Dozens of families across 5 states, years of research that destroyed lives. She maintained she'd been helping even as victims testified. The verdict brought relief, but not celebration. Patricia would serve time and receive mandatory psychiatric treatment. Other families would pursue civil suits. Precedents would be set. I kept attending the support group, sharing my story with new members, carrying familiar pain. We couldn't fix the system, but we could validate each other's experiences. Life continued with permanent changes. Trust came harder. Privacy felt precious. But I'd learned to document everything, to recognize manipulation, to protect myself and others. The cameras were gone, but I still checked corners out of habit. Patricia was locked away, but her influence lingered in small traumas and careful behaviors. Recovery wasn't a destination, but a daily choice. Some days were harder than others, but I was free. Dad was healing, and Patricia's research would never harm another family. That's the real ending, not dramatic justice, but quiet survival. Moving forward with scars but also wisdom, building the life that Patricia had tried to steal. And sometimes on quiet mornings, I brought daisies to Mom's grave and told her we'd won.